I'm Zach Martin. Welcome to the Big Fat American podcast. We have a very special guest. All our guests are special, but you are more special than the average, Charles, because you wrote a book about a subject that's near and dear to me, about the Beatles. It's the book of the top 10 Beatles list. It's available in paperback on Amazon. And I guess the whole idea of this book is you went to various people and asked them what their top 10 favorite Beatles songs are.
Yeah. Well, I had done a book called Book of Top 10 Horror Lists. And everyone knew my Beatles background and my history and all that, and said, "How could your book not be a Beatles book? What's up with that?" And those were my two passions growing up. Beatles music, of course, rock and roll, AM radio, and monster movies, the Universal monsters, and all that. And one just came quicker because I had a ton of these lists already in place. But when the horror book, the monsters book, got such great reviews and got feedback was so phenomenal, yeah, I said it's only a natural I have to do a similar book, but of all celebrities giving me their top 10 lists for Beatles stuff. The other one was celebrities giving me their horror lists. And the Beatle book, we did pretty much I did pretty much post-pandemic. So it was a little harder than the other one. When I was doing the other one, people were home with nothing to do. It was easy to do homework. It was easy to say, "Hey, Zach, I need a top 10 list of your favorite horror movies." Sure, I'll get you tomorrow. When I asked, rock stars and actors, they're in the middle of shows now. They're in gigging or they're doing films. It wasn't that easy. So it was a lot of pestering, a lot of staying on them, a lot of phone calls, and in some cases, visitations, anything I could do to get lists. And I said, when I hit 64, I would publish the book when I'm at 64.
64, yeah.
and hit the 64. And then, of course, the book went to print and a few more trickled in. So, maybe there'll be a volume 2 someday. But 64 top 10 Beatle lists from celebrities. Everyone who's reading it is loving it. And the celebrities themselves are just so, psyched to be in it. It's a very cool book.
It's not your average Beatles book, which I do appreciate. It's a very interesting take because there's so many different topics that you can cover as far as the Beatles, the history, each Beatle as a member, go over their albums, George Martin, growing up, playing at the Cavern, all of the various stories. But I really kind of dig what you've done in getting rock stars and various other celebrities to give them the top 10. I will say this, it's easier said than done because when I was working with Scott Muni and we would try to figure out what our favorite Beatles songs were, very hard to answer because there's only one Beatles song that stands out above and beyond all the rest. But it's sort of like one of those, de gustibus non est disputandum, taste is not to be argued. There's just no way to quantify it or qualify it. If you were to ask me my number one favorite, While My Guitar Gently Weeps.
Wow.
From the White Album.
Wow.
I went and I did ask Chatbot, the new AI feature that everybody's using. You can go to the open source. Yeah. And I asked Chatbot for the list of the top 25 best Beatles songs of all time. Yes. And people actually thought about the AI's answer. So that was an interesting experiment in that even an AI can't get something like that right.
That's amazing. So if you look at my chapter, which my editor said I had to include, I didn't want to. I didn't want to put one in the horror book or the Beatles book. My top 3 include While My Guitar Gently Weeps. And the only reason it may not have been number 1 is because Here, There, and Everywhere was my wedding song. So I couldn't not.
Yeah, you painted yourself into a corner on that. That's the problem.
Yeah.
I've always liked In My Life. I think that's a beautiful song by the Beatles that is amazing when you think of the fact that when they wrote it, they're in their young 20s, late teens, young 20s, but it's like age wisdom that's in that song that I was always marveling at that.
Every song of that ilk, and I alluded to it earlier, When I'm 64, how can you write such a prophetic, looking ahead to that age when you're in your 20s. And In My Life is such an amazing example of that. It's so strong even now. You mentioned it, and I'm like, wow, yeah, I want to hear that again. It's so beautiful.
What was a couple of songs that surprised you that made it on any particular list?
Nothing ever really surprised me because in my mind, there's no clunkers. Every bad Beatles song, if someone thinks this a bad Beatles song, is greater than most of the ones that are out there by the rest of the world. Everyone has their ones they've gotten tired of, perhaps. And the ones that I have, people are, no, man, that's my favorite. But I did a song index, and I go on, and you can go in order, and it's the ones that people pick. I don't know what's a forgettable B-side. George Harrison's "Don't Bother Me." Well, at least two people pick that. So I don't know what song surprises me as an inclusion, but I think you have something in mind. Yes.
Yeah, now that you mention it, I do. Again, going back to the White Album, I think it might have been done by the Beatles on purpose as a joke. You know what? We can make anything into a hit, John. We just sing about anything, like the number 9 over and over again, and people will like it. I think that is absolutely, the crappiest Beatles song I've ever heard in my life. Would not put it on an album, but I think they did it as a joke. I don't know. That number 9, number 9, number 9 has annoyed me so much. I never want to hear it. How about
It's
that?
it scared me as a kid. The background vocals and stuff, the dissonance, I was afraid to play it. I would skip it on the album. Yeah, I agree. So I looked in the book real quick, and although Revolution got picked, Revolution number 9 did not get a single vote. Whereas a similar song, but a lot happier and a lot more up tempo, "You Know My Name, Look Up My Number," which is
You know
also
my name, look up the number. Yeah, right.
that did get picked, interestingly enough. And
Okay,
that's I
so how hard was it to get some of the entertainers and musicians, artists to reply to you to give them their top 10? Was it pulling teeth, or were they more than happy to oblige?
Some were like instant. Oh, I'll have it for you tonight. I love the idea. Thank you. Others, it was homework. Who wants to do homework anymore? To sit down and write a list and think about it. And in some cases, they got back to me and said, Charles, I want to do this, but I want to represent myself well. I don't want to just give you 10 lists and say, okay, I like this because of the chorus. I like this because of Paul's harmony. I want to give this some thought. And a lot of them really, really did. Some, you ask about, pulling teeth. Some were such that I had to call them and I had to ask it to them as if it was an interview. And then I recorded it, and then I transcribed it and transposed it, whatever the word is, and put it out in the book. So there were some of those, but there's a handful that I really anticipated would and didn't. And then there were some that didn't, but wrote me that Lin-Manuel Miranda, Mr. Broadway, passed on it, but sent me some autographs, sent me the nicest letter. I thought, wow, he did that. He could have done a list in the same time that he wrote the letter and sent me the autographs, which was, I'll accept that. That's okay.
Well, again, it is hard to come up with a top 10 list of your favorite Beatles songs because it could change from day to day. So
Yes.
let me at least give you 5.
Go ahead.
Okay, so While My Guitar Gently Weeps, number 1.
Yeah.
Long and Winding Road, number 2. Across the Universe, number 3.
Love it. Love it.
Let It Be, number 4. And let's just say In My Life, number 5. Again, that could, but I can give you 10 that I really love. And I Am the Walrus is a high 6. You know what I mean? I am the Eggman. I am the Walrus. Cuckoo, cuckoo. I just always loved the sounds that were put together in those albums. And of course, you got Revolver as an album, which has got some killer cuts on that. So maybe down the road you can ask what are your favorite top 10 Beatles albums are, because
well, I did it open ended. I didn't just ask songs. So I gave it up to the people, and when I gave suggestions, it was favorite scenes from films, favorite actors, favorite songs, favorite solo songs, favorite anything. Larry Kane and Ivor Davis are two journalists who toured with the Beatles. Larry Kane was American.
Right.
Ivor Davis, British. Ivor was one of the only few people who joined them when they went to see Elvis at Graceland. And both of those gave me lists. And Larry's list, people keep telling me, wow, that really stands out, because he not only gave me his top 10 favorite Beatle concerts from 64, 65, but gave reasons why. And so that was really special. Elliot Easton from the Cars, the lead guitarist,
Right.
his top 10 list was the best Beatles middle eights, the bridges in the songs. And if you think about it, the Beatles bridges were amazing. You would have this amazing verse, chorus, and then pow, this bridge that came from nowhere, which
Yeah.
made the song even, like This Boy or whatever. Off the top of my head, I can't think of a bunch, but some of their bridges were most of the exciting parts of some of their songs. So yeah, they had open-ended what they can do. Most did their favorite songs and the reasons why, but some thought out of the box, and those are some of the most interesting.
I will say one of my favorite Beatles shows on the radio is Scott Meany's Ticket to Ride, which I don't know how many people are aware of this, but it runs on New HD New York, where Rock lives, which is a streaming radio station where you can get the app. It's downloadable, and it brings you back to the era of the mighty, world famous 1027 WNEW,
Wow.
New York, where Rock lives. And so the Beatles are a big part of our programming. On top of that, we have Beatle breaks at 2 a.m., 6 a.m., 11 a.m., 3 p.m., 9 p.m., 8 days a week, Monday through Sunday. The math works. So the Beatles are a big part of the fabric of New York City as well, including radio. They're just, you can't be a rock station without them. And I've always marveled. I don't know how many people have ever said to you, like, no, I don't like the Beatles. And I could tell you what Scott Meany would say. Well, then there's something wrong with you if you don't like the Beatles. How can you not like the Beatles?
I think that most people say it to be outlandish. For the longest time, the punkers would say the Beatles, blah. And then you look at the Sex Pistols and all these bands that love the Beatles, and you strip down the core and the rawness, you had great pop stuff. So I think a lot of them do it just to be controversial. You can't not like Beatles. If you could think, okay, I hate the Beatles' success and how everybody worships them and loves them. All right, maybe that's what bothers you. But then, you sit them down. You can't say this 5 songs you mentioned are crap. No one's going to say that. They'll acknowledge how great the songs are.
They're masterpieces of what they are. It's one masterpiece after another. Now,
true.
I will say that people would be surprised by me saying this. John Lennon's Imagine is not one of my favorite songs. I always felt it was like a nihilistic piece of crap to me. Like I never liked that song because it's like, what do you mean nothingness? I mean, I got to the point where Chrissie Hynde of the Pretenders told me, she goes, I don't like that song either. It sounds like he was in a bad mood, rolled out of bed and just put Imagine There's No Nothing, So a lot of people would be shocked of anybody saying that they don't like that particular song.
Zach, I'll share with you who liked it in my book.
Okay.
Liberty DeVito, Billy Joel's drummer. The actress Dinah Manoff from Grease and Soap. Angie McCartney, who married Paul McCartney's dad. Daryl McDaniels from Run DMC, the rapper. Kim Sledge from Sister Sledge. Larry Thomas, the soup Nazi from Seinfeld. And Dave Winfield, the Major League Baseball Hall of Famer. So you got a lot of people who love that song, but I think you're going to find people who think not necessarily dislike it, but maybe that it was overrated and aren't fans of the communist or whatever the concept is that's involved in it.
I did like Jealous Guy, however, and Starting Over, and I'm Losing You, and various other tracks that those are great songs from John. And I loved every single one of them. But when Imagine comes on, I'm like, meh, it's a big killjoy for me. Maybe it's because as a radio guy, everybody always requests that, and I got tired of playing it. So
interesting.
Could be that. But this idea that like there's nothing else out there. I don't know.
That's funny because in college radio, I was trying to push all the new music and everything that came out, and I would get requests for the Doors all the time. And I think I felt the same way about them. Um, I appreciate them now, but back then I would not play Doors. Everything was anti-Doors because those were the requests coming in. It's like the live band who hears Freebird and never wants to play Leonard Skinner again. So I get it. I think Imagine is anthematic, and when you think of John Lennon, sometimes that might be the first one that comes to mind for solo songs, only because what reinforces that with me is so many Beatle tribute bands, when they decided to add a few solo songs right at the end of their set, or would do perhaps an encore, or even a complete solo set, Imagine would always be the kicker for it.
All right, fair enough. Again, taste can't be argued. You can argue
Mhm.
about it, but it won't get you anywhere.
Right.
Who are some of the other people that are featured in this book besides Liberty and
Oh gosh. Well, talking
my
about
friend?
64 celebs, the ones that, if I said I'm proud of certain ones, others might get offended. But what I didn't expect and was really pleased to get was Dick Cavett, who's of course
Wow, that's
famous
cool.
TV. Yeah, see, that's
Yeah.
the reaction I was hoping for, and he ended his list with these are the stories I could tell, which means that he probably has a lot of other great Harrison and Yoko and Lennon stories that he didn't want to put in the book.
Well, that's great because if you watch Forrest Gump, right? Dick Cavett and John Lennon, that's that famous appearance. So
Yeah,
I think that's really cool that you got Dick Cavett to give you a list of Beatles songs. It's awesome.
yeah, very special. Really proud that the forward was by John Lennon's sister, Julia. Julia Baird gave me the forward. She wrote a beautiful piece. And the afterword is by someone I don't know if you've heard of, but very important in the Beatles history. His name is Bill Harry, and he was there from the beginning. He published a magazine called Mersey Beat, which really launched them in Liverpool, stayed friends with them forever, probably wrote more books on the Beatles than anyone else. Certainly, the Beatles Encyclopedia and all those great books. So him having written the afterword was very, very special. And you can just look down the list. It's three guys who were involved with Badfinger, some of the Quarrymen. If you're a Beatles diehard, you're going to find some names in there like, whoa, they're still around. That's amazing. But I think the selling point of the book is a general fan who loves pop culture, who just is off the top of his head. Ron Dante, the lead singer of the Archies. Whoa, his list is great. I'm glad he's in the book. Steve Hackett from Genesis. If you're
Oh,
into
cool.
rock and roll, you'll find these amazing people. One of the ones that were really special to me was a gentleman who is getting on in age now, a R&B legend. And if I do his voice, you might know who he is. I ain't got no home, but boom, boom, boom.
Oh,
Clarence
Frogman.
Frogman.
Yeah.
So
Clarence.
I happened to be in New Orleans, happened to get his address, knocked on his door. Girl comes to the door, opens the door. Henry, you got some of your fans here.
Oh, well, see, there you go.
He lets us in. We sit down, signs autographs, and tells me, I ask him questions. Who was your favorite Beatle? What's your favorite memory? Tells me. And I was able to compose a top 10 list just on our sit down conversation. So that one is one of the ones that, not only is a great list, but is a great memory tied to it.
What was the one person you thought to yourself, maybe ex post facto, it's too late, but that one person you're like, man, I wish I would have reached out. Anybody?
Oh, Zach, there's so many. And as I sit at night, and I do the scrolling, I'm like, how could I have not sent it to that person? I just realized, I sent it to a handful of like SNL, Saturday Night Live people a while back. And then they have a new cast. How could I have not followed up with that? How could I have not sent it to Jimmy Kimmel and Jimmy Fallon and all those guys? I'm thinking, whoa, any one of them could have come through. That goes on. That's the game that goes on forever. And eventually, if I do a second volume, I will do that.
You have to do a second volume because what you need to do is get Pete Best and ask him
What do you mean? What do you mean? I need to do that? Pete Best is not only in my horror book, Zach. He's in my Beatles book,
Well, you didn't
along,
tell me that. I mean, that's you know.
along with his brother, Rogue Best. And what I did for Pete's list is, I mean, we were close friends for many years, so I put in pictures of him with me, and believe it or not, in one of the pictures is Mona Best, who was Pete's mom, long
Oh,
gone. But
I know the whole story about, like, I'm not going to bring it up. I know Pete and his brother. They came over to the studio many moons ago. Denny
wow,
Somack was there,
sure,
and we started talking about the Cavern, Neil Aspinall,
oh,
and you know the the
the true
the
story.
theories of replacement. And that's all I'm going to say. I'm never going to get into that whole thing, but you might cover it in the book.
I do. What I'd like to share with you is a very rare picture of Pete Best, Sid Bernstein, and myself at a Beatles convention, probably from the '80s, and then us reuniting. Where the day that I got his Pete's list, because he was tough. I mean, we're close friends. He would say yes, but he was saying yes for 2 years, and it was a case of getting together and sitting down and having him put on paper. But that's me, a picture of myself and Pete, with me showing him his top 10 list in the horror book, which he'd never seen. And he gave me a great list for that too. Pete's a great guy. I love him
Oh,
dearly.
see, that's fabulous. I'm glad I brought it up.
So I
Isn't that
can say I have a Beatle in the book.
that it's a necessary part? I mean, it's just an interesting,
Yes.
uh, I would say just that alone, if you're a Beatles fan, you should get the book, because that is is such an interesting part of the history of the Beatles, and not too many people know the behind the scenes things. I'm like, even though Pete has told me it, I'm not telling anybody, because I think
Mm,
it's up to him to tell that story on his own terms. Right? You tell me something with
yeah.
confidence, I'm keeping it. So,
Yeah.
but it's
That's
still a
it.
very interesting story, and I feel bad
And it's
about what happened.
interesting because when people ask me, well, tell me some of the people who are in the book. Pete Best should be one of my first go-tos. I've got a Beatle in the book. And I take him, I don't want to say I take him for granted, but I just figure everyone knows my history with him. I managed him for a few years. I brought him to so many conventions. People know that we're close. I do, Zach, I don't know if you know, but I do the Beatle tours to Liverpool every summer. This is our 40th year of bringing Beatle fans to London and Liverpool on our Magical History tour. And it's just about, it goes without saying that if we're in Liverpool, we spend time with the Best family. We visit the Casbah Club. Rogue hosts us for an event or two. And so I'm just like, he's so almost part of the family. He's one of the guys he's not my first mention, and he's got to be.
Yeah.
I mentioned John Lennon's sister, and I mentioned, the Paul McCartney's stepmom and his stepsister in there, and a lot of people connected, people who played with the guys. And I, he's the Beatle. I should mention him first.
Well, I have a Ticket to Ride episode called Ye Crack.
Uh-huh.
How about that? Where where Scott goes to Ye Crack, and I'm going to send that to you so that you have a copy of that.
Yeah.
Ye Crack was the pub that all the lads would go to in Liverpool,
Yes.
and I think that John met Cynthia there at Ye Crack,
Absolutely. He
right?
absolutely did
Yeah.
100%.
Now, as much as I dislike Imagine, that's just a personal taste. I have to tell you, full disclosure, I've been involved with the John Lennon Educational Tour Bus and Songwriting Contest for over 25 years. And I myself have been up to Yoko's a few times early on to interview her about various things, about John, about her, about music, about the Beatles. And then one of the first projects I worked with the Lennon Bus was to have the kids of the five boroughs get together and redo Imagine, but more in like a hip hop type of flavor. So
Wow.
it was just my way of recreating that to put my own spin on it. So maybe I
So
shouldn't be so
cool.
harsh on the song, but it just it just I got, maybe I'm in a different place where when you get up in age, eternity is all you have to hope for. So I want to hold on to that hope.
Fair enough.
Yep. Now, besides the having Pete Best in it, who
Yeah.
are some of the actors that are featured?
Well, I mentioned Dynamanoff, and I in the horror book that skewed a lot more towards actors because obviously there were horror movie people and all that. For this one, the actors also border on um, music, like Mackenzie Phillips, who was the daughter for the Mamas and the Papas. But of course, we know her as an actress. She was on One Day at a Time. She's in the book and gave me a real good quote that I put on the back cover, where she said, "I slept with Paul McCartney," and that could
Yeah, with
be
the music playing.
that. No, 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 that could be revelationary if we still had like the National Enquirer and all that. She slept with him because she was a little kid. He was on a cot. He was napping. She jumped into the cot as a
Oh,
baby and
all right,
slept with
that's
him.
cute. That's
Great,
cute.
great
That's a
story.
cute story.
Yeah, yeah. So that's the first one that comes to mind as far as actresses. The another one is Lisa Welcho from Facts of
Yeah,
Life. She
yeah, that's
played
cool.
Blair,
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
and this is like the perfect timing for you to be interviewing me because last night she hosts a show on the MeTV channel called Collector's Call,
Yes,
and
I've
every
seen that.
yeah, so one episode is on pinball machines, one episode is on Kiss, one episode is on Superman. Well, last night's episode was on the Monkees. Last night it aired, and I was the expert, for lack of a better word, on the show. So Lisa, myself, and the monkey memorabilia person were the three, principals on the show. And when we filmed it way, way months and months ago, I said, Lisa, I need a top 10 list for you. She said, for what? I said, for this Beatles book. She goes, oh, I love the Beatles, no problem. And she gave me a top 10 list for the book. So it worked out. That's someone I probably would never have had in the book had I not, appeared on the show together with her. If I wasn't on the show with her, I never would have gotten that. So that's pretty much the biggest reason I got her as an actress. Other people who stand out in my mind are music people who aren't very out there a lot. Someone by the name of Melanie, who I'm sure you
I
remember.
got a brand new pair of roller skates. You got a brand new key. Do. Yep, that's great.
Right. And and look what they've done to my song Ma and Candles in the Rain. So she's one of these people who once in a while maybe she tours, but she's pretty I don't want to say reclusive because I don't know when this is airing, but she's doing her first ever celebrity signing convention, April 28th, 29th, and 30th in Parsippany Hilton at the Parsippany Hilton in Parsippany, New
Yes,
Jersey. It's an event called
I
Chiller
Chiller.
Theater.
She's going
Yeah,
to be at Chiller. Okay,
She's gonna
cool.
be she's gonna be at Chiller signing autographs. So that's very exciting. So she gave me a great list for the book, and that she's one of those people I'm just proud to have because she's not one of those people who are there, who are out there a lot. Another actor who comes to mind who's in the book, who's an incredible Beatles fan, who I actually met many years ago in San Diego at a Beatles convention because he was selling some of his memorabilia. Butch Patrick.
Oh, I
Eddie
know Butch. Yeah, I
Eddie
got his phone
Munster.
number. I got his home phone number. Yeah, that's cool.
So he's in the book too. I'll throw a rare Beatle one at you.
Okay.
You ready? You ready?
Yeah, go
Who
ahead.
was the first left-handed bassist in the Beatles?
Oh, Sutcliffe. I
Stu
don't know.
Sutcliffe was a righty. And when Stu stayed on in Germany, the Beatles had a few gigs. So Paul moved over, and a guy by the name of Chaz Newby, who's really one of those, secret missing guys in the whole Beatles history, played bass for 4 gigs. He was their first left-handed Beatle guitarist, bass player. Got his top 10 list too. Those are the
Oh,
ones that like as the diehard, I love that are in the book. And another one similar to that is Frank Ifield. No one remembers Frank Ifield. He had a hit called Remember Love or Remember Me or something, but he was on the same VJ label as the Beatles. And when VJ was really, really trying to milk the 12 whatever songs they had of the Beatles, they did Introducing the Beatles. Then they put out Beatles versus the Four Seasons. Any act that was on the VJ label, they combined with the Beatles to sell more albums. And sure enough, they put out an album called Jolly Watt, the Beatles and Frank Ifield. And people thought, whoa, I got to get this album. It's the Beatles singing with Frank Ifield. Of course not. It's a few of his songs and a few of the Beatles songs. So he was one of those factoids, through the years that Beatle fans always knew the name of if they were real collectors and real diehards, but never knew what happened to him. He was one of the ones that I was determined to track down and find. He was one of two. The other one I couldn't find and never probably will find, and that's Jimmy Nicol, who was the replacement drummer for Ringo when Ringo was sick, and they had to tour a few dates, without him. And Jimmy Nichols, no one knows where he is, how to find him, if he's even alive. It's one of the great mysteries. But those were some. You mentioned some actors, but I want to throw in actors and some of the ones that I thought were pretty special getting in the book.
I've got one for you, maybe in a volume 2. Dave Mason, the trumpet player that was one of the musicians, not Dave Mason, the Rock and Roll Hall of Famer from Traffic. There was Dave Mason who played the trumpet for some of their recordings.
Wow.
I don't know why I know that, but I just do.
Let's find him for the next chapter, for the next volume.
I don't know. Who knows if he's still alive?
He's still alive, right.
I do know that his trumpet was auctioned off one time. And at one point, interestingly enough, I actually had drum skins signed by Ringo and Pete.
Wow.
And I gave them away for charity to raise some money for someone who needed it. But I'm like, to this day, I'm like, darn it, I wish I didn't hate to say it. I should have just wrote a check and kept the skins.
So I have 3. I have Ringo's autograph, of course, tons of Pete's autograph, and then adding to the trifecta was Andy White, who was the drummer on Love Me Do. And he was a great guy too. He passed a few years ago. He lived in New Jersey. Great guy.
Wow,
originally,
how about that? Right?
Yeah.
So the book is available through Amazon. I found it there. Anywhere else people can find it is available in Barnes and Noble. Where can we get this?
Well, if they want to get a signed copy, the best thing to do is go right to the website, which is Book of Top 10, the number 10, of course. Book of Top 10 Beatle lists, not just Book of Top 10 Beatlelists.com, and they can get a signed copy. I'd love to send a copy myself. I personalize them all. It's the best way authors get their books out. It's, you sit at conventions, you go to libraries, and you send it through the mail. And it's such a joy to hear from people. Zach, I don't know if you know, but I published a magazine called Good Day Sunshine for 20 years, and almost 20 years. And some of the people who used to subscribe to that, who I haven't spoken to or heard from or sent anything to since the 80s or 90s, they're coming out and buying the book. So it's special. It's like reunion in a little way.
That's fantastic. And I'm not going to let you answer the question of how many disc jockeys you might have gotten to do their top 10. I don't want to know because I'd be jealous.
Only one. Can you tell me who it was? If you had a guess? I
don't want to say.
I'll give you a hint. W.A. Beatles. No?
Wow. Well, hold on. Who's still alive?
That's what you got to go by. Still alive, still on the air. Cousin Brucey, of course. Yeah.
All right. Well, that to me is like, yes, okay. Absolutely. He was there when they came to Idlewild and was part of the whole broadcast at A Beatles. So it's only fitting that Cousin Brucey is in the book. Funny how I did figure out which one was still alive. Cousin Brucey is the only one left, I think.
That's it. You had to do it by process of elimination. You go through that whole, on-air roster, and he might be the only one still around. 87, and God bless him, he's great.
Yeah, that's great. I think he is the only one that's still around, sadly. But I had a pleasure to know most of them, so that's kind of cool.
Wow.
So I got that. Well, thank you so much. This is one of the greatest interviews I've ever had because it's about one of my favorite topics in the whole wide world. And we could spend hours talking about our favorites and not so favorites and Beatles stories and programs that we've heard on the radio throughout the years. Ed Sullivan. I will say this, that I'm amazed. And you talked about some of the rockers. Like Paul Cook from the Sex Pistols told me, loved the Beatles. Ozzy Osbourne loves the Beatles.
Loved.
Paul Stanley, Kiss, loves the Beatles. these guys that were in bands that just were like, yeah, you know, rocking the house down, that you would think there were no soft side. They all loved the Beatles. And I always found that really fascinating. And what
Well,
that made me do is to really appreciate them.
I'll leave you with my Paul Stanley story. Paul McCartney finally tours again. After all these years, we never think we're going to ever see him. Now it's a regular occurrence. Thank goodness. Let him keep going. Madison Square Garden. I'm sitting a few rows away from Paul Stanley, and he is singing to every song. He's rocking every song.
Great.
He's loving it. We walk out together. I go, "Hey, wasn't that show great?" He goes, "No, it was all right." He couldn't admit to just a plain old fan walking out with him how great it was. But I saw him, and I know how much he loved it. Book of Top 10 Beatle lists.
It's all right.